Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media Live. We are, oh my gosh, I'm actually just looking at all the comments right now of where people are dialing in from, and it's just incredible. We have Boston, Kentucky, Florida, Italy, Brazil, oh my gosh, the UK. Welcome, everybody, to our Soulcast Media Live. Just so for everybody who's joining for the first time, my name is Jessica Chen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media. And we do these monthly Soulcast Media live events where I invite a fantastic guest so we can chat about things that are related to communications, confidence, and really just workplace success. Now, before we get started and before I introduce my guests that I have here today, I have to do a really quick shout out. Thank you to our sponsors, needthat.com, for sponsoring this event. The topic that we're going to be talking about today is all about how you can live fearlessly and communicate confidently. Now, before I introduce my guest, I want to let everybody know that today's event is going to be about 45 minutes long, but it's all for you. Meaning, if there's any questions that you have for me or Dr. Todd Dewett, please leave it in the chat. We will do our best to try to get to your questions. But really, my hope is Dr. Todd Dewett and I, we're just going to be chatting about things related to communications, presentations, and things like that. So again, welcome to our event. And you know what? Let's just dive in. We have Dr. Todd Dewett, over 200 people on right now.
Hey, that's awesome.
All right, Todd Dewett, please give us a really quick, warm introduction of who you are, what you do, and you do a lot of things.
I don't know about that, Jessica. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me. I try to be fairly focused and simple these days. I write books, I give a lot of speeches, and I make a lot of educational courses, most of which, of course, are on LinkedIn Learning, like yours, and coach a lot, increasingly informal instead of formal these days, as an outgrowth of being an online educator. But I'd say writing, speaking, and making courses dominates my day.
So actually, for those who are curious, Todd and I, we actually met because, like, as he mentioned, we are both LinkedIn Learning instructors, and a lot of our courses are related to communications. And because I guess it's safe to say it's both of our passions to help people with this skill, I thought it was really important to invite him on and really just chat about this living fearlessly and communicating confidently. And again, if anybody has any questions as we dive into our chat, which I have a lot of questions for you, Todd, please leave it in the comments below. So one of the first things that, let's just kind of start off from the top. Now, I chose the topic, living fearlessly and communicating confidently, because it actually touches upon a lot of the work that you're doing, especially now, this idea of living fearlessly. I want to talk about this part first before we get into the communications part of it, because I'm curious to get your thoughts, Todd. What are the links between this idea of feeling confident, living fearlessly, and just being able to communicate what's on your mind and your heart, really?
Well, the more you have fear of living fearlessly, the less you're going to be confident in communicating. I mean, the reason I do what I do is because back in the day, I think this is my third career. So the first one was in consulting with Anderson and Ernst & Young, and then I was an academician for a long time, and now I'm just a pontificating person who has the pleasure of speaking to a few Jessicas on occasion. But the reason I started that whole changing process is because my observation of young professionals at these prestigious big box consulting firms was that they were scared. They act smart, they hide behind degrees. They were not asserting themselves, speaking their truth, chasing their dreams. They were checkboxing some smart moves, frankly, often impressive moves. But nonetheless, they were not living fearlessly. They were trying to be smart within the rules, with inside the box thinking, whatever cliche you want there. I was fascinated by that because what I saw was hardworking, super smart people not reaching their potential, which means they would speak this. Here's your link. You ready? They would speak in this measured way that they were confident would offend no one and would meet the needs of the audience in front of them, most importantly, their supervisor, as opposed to looking at the situation, looking for opportunities to change and saying what needs to be said. So I've kind of been on a mission ever since to get people a little more comfortable, a little more skilled at saying what needs to be said.
So the question is, what needs to be said? And second of all, I have a lot of empathy for those. And I imagine a lot of the people who are in our audience today, they are working for these prestigious companies that they are so proud to be at, right? It's good for their career. It's what they were hoping for. And, kudos to that, right? But when you get into the working world, there's always this balance, right? And I always say there's this balance between how do you show up, show your authentic self, yet make sure that you're pleasing your team, but it's like, how do you do it? So yeah, that's my question for you, Todd.
That's awesome that you phrased it that way, because I do need to be checked. Any Pied Piper out there talking about this thing they love talking about often frankly sounds a little simple, and we need to be pushed back. So let me give you some nuance there. Even though I'm a preacher full time for authenticity, among other things, it's not a simple thing. It's not an easy thing. It's not a risk-free thing. How do you get away with it, to kind of use your words? The short answer is you learn your context first. You learn how to be a great performer second, within that context, understanding the social rules and norms that dominate that context. And once you kind of understand the rules, once you've proven yourself as a performer, whatever that means we could talk about, then you've kind of earned the right. That's the way I like to say it. And even though I'm in love with the Z's and anyone younger who are going to help us in the next couple decades, the truth is I don't advocate full authenticity all the time, full expression whenever you feel like it. I don't. I talk about what it means to understand and respect the fact that you're sharing this space at work. You got to learn what it means there in terms of the norms of behavior. And then you've got to learn how to be a great performer in the face of them. And then you will earn the right to increasingly start being as you need to be. I didn't walk in at 20 and start speaking the way you're hearing me speak and looking the way you see me look. No, I spent a lot of years learning, trying, adding value within the system before I started questioning it. I'm not saying that's the only path. I'm saying that's a smart, productive path.
You know, when you're talking about that, it kind of reminded me. So when I first started my career, so I wasn't always a LinkedIn learning instructor. My career started as a broadcast television journalist. That was actually my first career. And I was in that industry for about 10 years. So at that time I was 20, 21 years old, getting my first reporter job. And I'm sure for anybody who is young and green and new into any industry, you walk in and you're kind of like, there is that fear, right? Because you're like, it's your first job and you're observing, right? I'm sure everybody is observing. How are people acting? What's appropriate? What's inappropriate? Which brings me to the word that you used, perform. Now, perform is an interesting word, because sometimes I feel like it can get like a negative connotation to it, right? You mean like, what do you mean perform? Like, I'm just the way I am, or, whatever it is people say. But I think the way you highlighted that word is, yes, context. Context is so important. And this idea of making sure that you're also, incorporating what is around you, how people are going. I mean, how would you kind of hone in on this word of perform, and what can people take away from that word that you're using?
I think there's a lot of ways to tackle that, and be honest with you, Jessica. So the social scientist in me is dying to back up and say, let me give some of this context. We have been conditioned to think about what do others need? How do I look good in their eyes? What will please them? How do I meet expectations? So the answer to your question for me is all about understanding expectations, like them or not, fair or not. Understanding them is step one to dealing, with your role and your growth, however you want to. You have to understand expectations. Here's the history, though. We have been conditioned back to fear. These things are all related. Conditioned to seek to meet expectations, as opposed to conditioned to do what humans are naturally wired to do, which is to explore, to try, to screw up and not feel like that's a fatal flaw, but to then move on. That's what young people do all the time. They ask why like nobody's business. They think, they imagine. Our rules as adults that we do need to avoid chaos really are the things over time that squash that. And thus we get people who are 21, to use the number you threw out there, and they show up at work. And the first thing they do is they go, not how do I stand out, which may or may not show up in your thoughts quite soon. But you start by going, what are the rules? What do I need to do? How do I need to please people to survive here? That's kind of a very initial thing. I don't want to say that's purely fear, but a lot of it's fear, because when we're young, I mean, I'm dying to hear as another achiever, what your view on this is, Jessica. Our parents, good parents, I should say well-intentioned parents, not that all parents are great parents, well-intentioned parents. We create children that fear. Well-intentioned teachers. We create children that fear. We fear not making mom and dad happy. We fear not making the A and getting the smile from the teacher, or the high five award, or whatever they're giving out. That's a very normal part of most Western cultures anyway. I'm pretty sure it's fairly true for most Eastern cultures, if not more in some of them. So that leaves a fundamental question for us, or maybe it's a future show. How do you think about really honoring the word creativity or innovation or change when our systems are creating people that are more fearful than they are inquisitive, which is a fundamental problem?
Okay, I have so many thoughts on what you just said. And, you talked about fear, and I will go back to talking about kind of my own. I mean, so obviously I'm Asian American. Ethnicity, I'm Chinese, but I was born and raised in America. And growing up, and it actually took me some time to reflect on this, but growing up, there was two things that I felt like kind of was in our household, which is oftentimes making me as a young child at the time feeling both guilty or ashamed if I didn't do something that I was told to do. And I don't know if this is like an Asian culture thing, and I don't know if that's something that you kind of potentially relate to, but I sometimes feel like Asian culture is very good at making people feel ashamed or guilty for things like, oh, and why is that? Look at this person, look at what they're achieving. Look at that person, look at what they're achieving. What about you? And I don't think when parents say that to their kids, like my parents used to say this to me too, it wasn't coming from a malicious place. I think it was just their form of motivating me, for example, to achieve, because look at this person, look at that person. But the problem with this, Todd, I think, is it creates this black and white thinking, a win or lose, a me or them type of mentality. And I think when you go out into the working world, what I discovered was there's no black and white. There's so much gray, right? You know, there's a lot of these like also unspoken things that happen in the workplace of how you have to interact with people, of understanding things. I don't know. That just kind of was some of the things that I was thinking about, just kind of from, we were talking about upbringing a little bit. That kind of resonated with me. And I thought about it a lot too.
Okay, so this is totally unscientific, but I have to relate to what you said by saying that when I went for my PhD at Texas A&M, there was maybe two white guys and a whole bunch of people with beautiful tans from around the world, many of them from the Far East, because they were smart enough to do the math associated with being a scientist. And I got stories over the years of being there with them that sounded a lot like the one you just told. So not a scientific bit of analysis, but some confirmation. The question is, how much of that is really good? Well, I can't answer that. That's not my area. But what I can tell you, as two people who are very interested in work life, is that if we have a majority of people showing up with some amount of that reticence, dare I say fear, because of the way we've been brought up, for better or for worse, what do we do about that? Boom, we do have good news. My first love as an academician was studying creativity and innovation. There's a whole lot of people at a whole lot of schools that have been doing it for the last 40, 50 years, in particular the last 30 or so, really interesting. And the answer is we can still learn to lead and relate to people in a way that makes them more comfortable instead of less comfortable. We often call it psychological safety. And guess what? I mean, big shock, Jessica, right? When people feel a little more psychologically safe at work, they speak up faster, they get more honest, they're willing to experiment more and support you when you do those things, all of which make your team more likely to be creative and innovative. Shocker.
Shocking. So for those who are just joining right now, welcome. We are about almost 20 minutes into our chat here. We have over 320 some people on this. So again, welcome everybody to this Soulcast Media Live event. I'm here with my friend, Dr. Todd Dewett, and we're talking about living fearlessly and communicating confidently. We initially were just kind of talking about the fear aspect that comes in for a lot of people who are in the working world. How are you supposed to act? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? And of course, a lot of it has to also stem from how we were raised, things we were taught, things we were told, right? Now, what I want to do now is actually want to shift into the communications aspect of today's talk. And communications, I feel, and this is why I'm so passionate about communications, you know, growing up, I was not a good communicator because I was both very shy, very introverted. And a lot of it was because I was just afraid of, you know, how do I express myself? I didn't really know how. So I kind of just kept quiet, right? But fortunately, because of my journey and career as a broadcast journalist, you really are taught to put yourself out there, and not just put yourself out there, but how do you do it tactfully and strategically? So it's a lot of what I teach today. But I know, Todd, you have a lot of tips yourself. So when it comes to communications, and I know a lot of your LinkedIn Learning courses are all about presentations, elevator pitches, how do you say no, you know, all the things I want to talk about today. But let's start with the first thing, which is when you're at work and you're dealing with your team and you're working on a project, I feel a lot of people struggle with how do you tactfully say no, and how can you go about approaching this? And of course, no can be for a lot of different situations, but generally speaking, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, it's a great topic for sure. And we usually have common communication situations that pop up and recur that we aren't handling extremely productively. So we pick them apart. That's why this online learning world that's emerged with shorter, let's say, bits of learning compared to degrees is so interesting to me, because you can tackle any given one of them when you're ready to do that. So learning to say no is a good example of one of those recurring common situations. And most people have a standard way of reacting, which tends to be not cooperative, which is to say, I'm too good at saying no. That's quite rare, but it's one of the two most common, I would say. And the most common by far is saying, yeah, saying, okay, I'll cave in, whatever, instead of me saying no. And thus I get walked on more than I should. My schedule gets trampled a little more than it should. Others might dump a little work on me more than they should, etc. So how do you change that situation? First thing I would tell anyone is you need to know where you stand on that spectrum. Where is your actual behavior? Don't assume that you're the best viewer of you. That's going to sound strange to a lot of people, but the truth is we have all kinds of wonderful biases that help us stay sane every day, and you really do need some candid feedback. So go find one or two people who would like you enough to be honest and ask them where they see you with regard to that skill or any skill that we could be talking about. So once you get a little grip based on your gut and one or two people telling you, here's what I'm actually seeing in you, then you kind of know where you are. Now, if it's true that you need to learn to say no a little better, if that is you, okay. Here's the good news. You don't have to start throwing bombs that upset people. That's not what the skill is. The skill here is trying to figure out how to communicate to someone when it's more appropriate and less appropriate to ask you that. And when you are more stressed and need to risk saying no versus more open and able to say yes to whatever the request might be. So you can think about being really stressed out and under a deadline that's 2 hours away. Just an explanation of that simple fact makes it perfectly acceptable to most people to say no. And there's a more insidious example here, and you and I both know it. That's when someone asks you to do things all the time because you've never been good at saying no. And what do you do about that? Well, it's unfortunate, but sometimes you are your best advocate, and you're going to have to learn how to draw a line. And so how you do that? Well, there's different ways you can do it. You can say, can I get back with you later? I'm really busy. Now you're deferring, which is almost like saying no, and you're getting them used to the fact that you're saying something other than yes. So I really like that one. Can I help you with this, but not this? Now you're giving them partial support, but not full support. Again, conditioning them to expect something other than just, yes, I'll comply. And then sometimes you have to go ahead and step forward. And I'd love to hear your take on it too. I'm supposed to be the guest, but there's so many good ways to do this. How do you actually on occasion say, I'm sorry, I can't do that? I'll give you one that I love. I really do love. And people can abuse this, but if you rarely say it, it's wonderful. You ready? That's a little outside the scope of what I need to accomplish today, which is an intelligent way to say that's not my job. Now, I don't want anyone to abuse that's not my job because they can. But occasionally when you're dealing with someone who pushes a little hard, encroaches a little hard, it can be a useful reminder that tells them, do what you need to do. Don't walk on me too much. Does that make sense?
It's so much harder saying no than it is to say yes, because I think naturally as humans, we want people to like us. We want people to approach us. We don't want to be left out. We're afraid sometimes if we just keep saying no, then we'll be left out later on, right? So I think like you mentioned all these little tactics of like how you can say no, but like you said, it's really a skill. Now, I think early on in people's career, maybe you might have to say yes a little bit more, but it's all about boundaries. And you'll find that as you continue to work and as, you continue to work with different people, different teams, that if you're good at your job, people probably will walk up to you and ask you for help because they're like, wow, Todd is great. Jessica's great. I would love them to help on A, B, and C, right? And again, it's not about saying no. It's more about, boundaries of what makes sense, your time, priorities, the quality of what you can even contribute, So I think it's like all these considerations. And, you mentioned one great tip. It's maybe not now, maybe reach back out in a month or two when my plate clears up a little bit, right? So you're not necessarily closing the door, but you're essentially almost deferring, but it's letting them know that you're not necessarily rejecting the idea either, right?
You said something brilliant. You said, if you're good at what you're doing, people are going to come around and ask you for more help and include you in more things. That's utterly true. And there's also a kind of a flip side benefit that comes with that, because if you are, now I'm referring to not just your task performance, but also your relationship quality. If on average, that's a positive, helpful, supportive type of thing that you're offering people, they'll be more understanding, not less, when you have to occasionally say no. And because of your high standing with performance and relationships, it's a little easier to get away with saying no. There's an incentive to be a high performer right there.
Okay, so we've talked about how you can artfully say no without necessarily closing doors or being off-putting in any way. The second communications thing I want to talk to you about, and would love to get your thoughts, is one of the biggest fears people have, which is about presentations, public speaking. And let's talk about the two types of environments. Traditionally, it's always like if you're in a meeting, boardroom or whatever it is. But now a lot of us are doing presentations in the virtual world. I do a lot of it. I'm sure you do a lot of it too, Todd. So what are your tips for presentations and how people can build that confidence when it comes to presentations?
I love this topic. And I know you do too. I have a few standard kind of responses and then a few that really speak to my personal experience. The standard thing is know your audience and be prepared. Let me say it again. Know your audience and be prepared. Every audience is different. You don't speak to your colleagues the way you speak to senior executives at most firms, just to make one example. And be prepared means that you thought through your notes and maybe even rehearsed the talk more than one time before you've got to do it. That's a minimal expectation for anyone that wants to kill it when they actually have to give a talk, short, medium, or long. Then there's my personal favorite, frankly, which is that when you give a talk, whether it's Zoom or sitting around the board table or on stage like I often am, it's not just about informing someone with facts. Really, whether or not it sticks, they like you, whatever that means, comes down to emotions. Emotions are as or more important than the knowledge you try to impart in any given talk. That is usually logically understandable by someone I would share it with, but it's more difficult to go ahead and grasp and somehow internalize and use. And it is a skill, but skills sometimes take hard work and practice, as you know well, Jessica. But I throw that out there. You have to infuse emotion. Now, how do you do that? Tons of answers. It means presenting this much instead of this much, so you can use more examples instead of just bullet points or things on a spreadsheet. It means infusing a little honest commentary and authenticity instead of only rigid professionalism with no emotion. It means using a video or a story full of emotion that makes the point or two that are most important in your talk come to life in a way a number or a quiet word never ever could. Emotion makes learning stick. So usually people stop at step one. Am I putting down the facts these folks need to hear when I give a presentation? And that's only step one. Step two is how do I deliver that with devices and with my own emotion in a way that makes them feel emotion, because that is the total package.
I'm smiling so much right now because everything that you say is truly gold. And I cannot agree more with you. And like I said, public speaking is not something that yes, some people are born maybe better public speaker than others, let's be honest. But some people are just truly, it's something that they have to learn. But that's the thing, you can learn it. And I think both you and I, Todd, we both teach this aspect of how can you learn to be a better public speaker? And you really hit the nail on the head. Most people focus on the content. Oh, does this slide look good? Do I have all the data and the facts and the numbers in? Do I have my bullet points in? Okay, slide number 2, do I have all this information? But they don't focus on what is, if arguably, perhaps even more important, which is how do you deliver this information so that it sticks? And you said using emotions. And a lot of people, they're just so uncomfortable with that because it's like, oh, but is that going to seem weird if I use emotions? But the problem is if you don't, this is how you talk. It's this monotone voice that it just goes in one ear and out the other. And if we're talking about communications, whether you're doing a presentation to 2 people, 10 people, 100 people, you want the information to stick. How does it stick? It's all about your delivery. And you're right. A lot of people focus on just putting the deck together and getting the deck approved, right? It probably has to pass through multiple hands and multiple managers.
Sure.
But whoever's doing the presentation, are you spending the time doing it? And for example, I'm going to be doing a huge presentation later this afternoon for HP. And even though I present multiple times, I still spend the time practicing my delivery, because even though I'm fairly comfortable presenting, sometimes it lands a little differently every time, but it's focusing on the content and the delivery. So you hit the nail right on.
Perfectly well said. You know what? There's plenty of research, by the way, that backs up your little summary right there. It is true that a mediocre subject matter expert can stand in front of a group and deliver effectively and be rated higher by the audience time and time again than a great expert with mediocre delivery skills. I think that alone is something your audience has got to think about.
Yes. And everybody who is listening, all 325 of you guys who are on this right now, again, thank you so much for staying on with us. But really, if you walk away with any golden nugget, I really hope it's this one, which is because most of us more or less will be doing some sort of presentation at some point in our career. And take it from us, right? It's truly content and delivery and focusing just as much on both because it's really important. Okay. My next question for you, Todd. Similar to what we're talking about, it's this idea of creating an elevator pitch. And I know you have a course that's talking about elevator pitch, but what's an elevator pitch? When do you need it? Does it change in different circumstances? What are your thoughts on this?
That's a great topic. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it's become even more interesting to people as we have been displaced in a variety of different ways and or we've been seeking voluntarily new opportunities. And so we're trying to talk about ourselves more. How do you do that? Well, the short answer is you don't do that effusively for 10 minutes when you meet someone. You got to do that in a measurable, digestible, coherent fashion. So if you meet someone in a long elevator ride, or if you're at the proverbial networking event or cocktail party after dinner, et cetera, and someone says, you know, Jessica, it's great to meet you. What do you do? Because we don't have great skill in what to say first. And so most people just go, what do you do? Well, let's deal with that reality. And the question is, I mean, the task before you is to be prepared for that so that you don't go for 10 minutes saying a rambling bunch of stuff. And I'll give you one of the punchlines from my very short course that's now been seen by, I think, over 1 million people. You've got to be able to speak about who you are coherently in 15 to 20 seconds. It's a tiny comment about where you've been, where you are, where you might be wanting to go in 10, 15, 20 seconds maximum, because any more than that, and this probably sounds strange to some people, but take my word for it, any more than that will sound oddly like a lot to someone who you just met and said hello to. Here's the good news. If you'll rehearse, go find your good friend Jessica, share it with her, say, hey, let me hear yours. Do that type of informal feedback with your colleagues or your close friends. Absolutely. But then when you have to actually do it, you're going to sound coherent and more comfortable as opposed to searching and not knowing what to say, which, believe me, they can read on your face. So being prepared and being brief and being clear, these things make that person feel more comfortable. And here's the punchline, the big punchline, Jessica. If you can interact quickly with someone in a way that makes them a little more comfortable instead of more tense or uncomfortable, they're going to engage. They're going to inquire for more, and you're going to have an opportunity, and this is huge, to inquire about them, which is more important than continuing to talk about yourself. They want to feel included and important as well.
I think of the example of, you know, when people go to watch a movie, you always have the trailers in the beginning, right? What's the point of the trailers? Is to entice you to ask more, to come and watch more, to ask me more. An elevator pitch is kind of similar. Are you sharing enough that people want to get to know you? And and usually with trailers, you probably know, it's always like the most interesting parts, right? It's like the action-filled, you know, scenes that they put together in a 2-minute reel, whatever, right?
It's the highlight without bragging.
I love that.
So if you ask me, I would say, well, I write books and I give speeches and I make a lot of online courses for platforms like LinkedIn Learning. I might say that. I wouldn't say, you know, I got 35 courses in 200 countries and 7 languages. I wouldn't do any of that. That comes later, maybe, depending on how this interaction unfolds. But you start with the honest, useful, best foot forward without bragging summary. And when they see you comfortable and happy to share that, they're going to be more comfortable and happy to share right back. And that's where new connections begin. What's more important for a career than new connections?
Absolutely. So one of the things is people, and I've worked with a few people on elevator pitches, especially high-level executive CEOs, who sometimes get into this trap of they'll sound like they're just kind of reading off their resumes a lot of the time. I graduated here, I studied here, I've been here, been that. Great, you know, but it's like that's not You know what I mean? It's like missing that. And you talked about it before, emotion, right? Your content is just as important as how you deliver this information. But again, it's not about reading off your resume in your elevator pitch. So
No, it's more
Todd,
about authenticity, comfort, conversational instead of formal. That's what makes people feel more at ease and willing to inquire further.
it is. So if you have any actually tips right now for people to, okay, as people are watching, they're like, okay, as I'm thinking about crafting my elevator pitch, what are some things that I need to keep in mind? Perhaps things I should say in my 20-second elevator pitch. Is there anything that you can share, Todd, that people can be like, okay, I kind of know that that's what I need to incorporate or take out next time?
Well, definitely less is more. And I don't care if you won an award or took a course. Less is more. High level is better than detail. Summary is better than overly specific. So, you could say I'm a mechanical engineer as opposed to a specific variant of a mechanical engineer in a given industry. No, I'm a mechanical engineer right now. I'm running an electronics shop. That is a useful conversational way to say something someone else, maybe the executives you were referring to, could say with 75 words. So really less is more, high level. And then I would go back to what I said a minute ago. Really go find 2 or 3 people you trust and practice, because you don't see yourself the way they do. And they'll tell you that makes no sense, or that needs more clarity, or you could cut that in a way that your brain might not quickly see. So go for less, go for high level and simple as a place to start, and then get great feedback. Believe me, if you just start with that advice, you're going to sound fairly coherent next time you pitch yourself.
I think sometimes people tend to talk longer than they should is because maybe they don't trust that somebody will actually ask a follow-up question. So they feel that they just have to fill the air. But I always say most of the time, depending on how you deliver the information, if the other person is listening and what you're saying is concise and interesting, they will ask you more questions, and you don't need to necessarily feel the need to continuously talk and talk and talk, because the chances are if you continually talk, the other person will be like, how do I respond to this? You just dumped a whole essay on me, right?
So one of the traps a lot of people get into with pitches is that they have a desire to make an ask. Hey, are you guys hiring? Or whatever the ask might be. And the goal is never to make an ask on an initial meeting, if at all possible. It's to establish rapport and to listen more than you talk, which is the key to connection for sure. Because if you can get connection, only after that, maybe will it be okay to have some form of ask. But without connection, rapport, comfort, which is an investment in sharing a little and listening a lot, does it even possibly give you a shot at making the ask? So forget about that and forget about the details. Think about summarizing you clearly, polished like that, so that really it's just a platform for you to learn about them. That's rapport.
You touched on a point that I think I really have to highlight, in the sense that sometimes people forget, like, that is the point of communication, at least early on, is developing that connection and the rapport. But sometimes people fall into this trap of being, what I would say, too transactional in how they engage with people. And perhaps it's because they're uncomfortable, or maybe it's because they're in a rush, right? There's not enough time to, have that. And of course, context matters too.
Yeah.
But I do feel, especially early on, yes, you want to avoid that, what you just said, asking for things early on, because the person is not going to feel necessarily great about it. The fact that the first time they ask you for something, it's like, can you do this? Can I have that? Or whatever it is. And it becomes, again, very transactional without them getting to even know you, right? So
correct. I would even challenge anyone listening. There's a rote thing that we do in networking where we go, it's Jessica, it's great to meet you. And business cards. We do less of that these days, but we still do it all the time in business settings. And I think the challenge, and I mean this, and I've done this, is can you say something simple, short, and memorable that would make obsolete the need for the business card that they already received too many of, that they don't really want in the first place? Can you be interesting and useful enough for them to remember you? That's a way better challenge than can I go buy a complete business card?
Okay, I feel like there's still so much I want to ask you, and I can't believe we're almost 40 minutes into this chat, Todd. I'm just having so much fun, and I think this topic, again, we both love talking about communications, so I think we can go on and on about this. But I guess one of the last things I do want to make sure that we talk about today is, so working remotely, stress, things like this that I think a lot of us have experienced this last year and a half. And I don't know how things are going to play out the next few months. I know a lot of companies are going hybrid depending on your organization. But I know you also talk a lot about time management, stress, working remotely. So what are some of your general feelings and thoughts about this topic?
Wow. Those are wonderfully related, but there's so much there. I'll give you two quick thoughts. First on time management, and then on stress and working remotely and those related ideas. So first on time management. I think I have one of the shortest courses anywhere in the world on that. And it's because I just had a riff that I used with MBA students when I was a professor back in the day that they found useful, that we turned into an ad-libbed course one day, which millions have watched. Here's the punchline. You ready? To manage one's time better, you simply have to know what matters, 80-20 everything, right? Know what's strategically important in terms of tasks and people in your life. Number two, find your Einstein window. When during the day does your brain really have its peak functioning time? Number three, this is it. Ready? Learn to protect that window. That could be saying no. That could be working somewhere else than where you normally work. Find a way to focus on what matters at the right time and protect that window so you can stay focused. I actually think that's all you need to take a step forward with time management. So I would ask you to do an audit and just think about where you've been, and maybe take a diary for a few days and ask yourself, are you focusing on that which matters most when you should, and protecting that time? It might be very eye-opening for some of you. Not unrelated in your question is about stress, remote work, and such. And all I would say is that you got to lead with a whole lot of love today. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. What people who are out there in new positions, unemployed, or somehow unexpectedly working remotely, which might be very new and jarring to some people, they need to know this: they are not alone. One of the greatest leadership tips anyone, professional tips anyone could give someone else right now, is to try and react decently and informatively, helpfully to others in a way that helps them know they're not alone. You've got their back. You're listening, if nothing else, and there's value in their words. If you can communicate that simple idea, I guarantee you that simple idea can be powerful for a lot of people today.
Going back to time, and to bring it back full circle, obviously making sure that you're managing your time well is also knowing how to say no, which we talked about in the first part of today's chat, in the first 15 minutes for those who want to rewatch this later on. But I'm curious, Todd, when are your hours of the day that you protect the most?
So depending on who's listening, this will sound affirming or horrifying. I'm one of those people that wakes up and goes, it's a new day. I'm great from sitting at my desk from 7 to 11. That's my window that I can function outside of that window, maybe even at a high level, but that is when my brain really works. Other people, it's midday. Other people, it's late in the day. Other people, it's midnight when they get the snack from the fridge. We're all different. Just respect what it is, know what it is, and figure out how to use and protect that time.
Mine, actually, I will share, is kind of horrific. It's actually really late at night.
See?
And it is. And I don't know why. I mean, I've always been more of a night person. I can stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning, no problem. But if you try to get me up at 7 in the morning, that's almost impossible. That's just me. So for me, I actually feel most energized at night. Like I can actually I can get a lot of things done. I'm in the process of writing a book right now, and I actually feel most inspired at midnight. It's terrible. My husband hates it, but sometimes I have to just kind of be like, okay, so sometimes there's certain days for it. But yeah, it's funny. Everybody has their own preferences, and everybody kind of knows.
My wife hates me in the morning too, so don't worry.
I love it. Okay, so you know what? We're about to wrap up here, Todd. And again, I have to say thank you to you, to everybody, the more than 300 of you guys who stayed on and just we're part of this chat. So Todd, where can people find you? Please let people know.
Well, thanks for asking. Definitely on LinkedIn. That's my main social platform home. And aside from that, my website, which is drdewett.com, DRDEWETT.com.
So again, we host these Soulcast Media Lives once or twice a month, depending on our schedule. And I invite fantastic guests like Dr. Todd Dewett to chat about really just more about career, communications, professional advancement, things that I think a lot of us also care about as well, because of course work is a huge part of our lives. And I think succeeding is something that we always think about as well. So again, Todd mentioned where you can find him. Just like him, I'm also most active here on the LinkedIn Learning or LinkedIn platform. I post a lot of communication tips almost every day. So be sure, if you don't follow me already, to follow me. We have an upcoming event later on this month, so be sure to RSVP for that. And before we wrap up, Again, I need to thank our sponsors, needthat.com, for, of course, supporting us in putting on an event like this, because, again, I think this topic of communications, leadership is very important. So again, Todd, I have to say thank you so much for your time. And again, everybody who joined, we will see you soon. So thank you, everybody.